having worked on Julia Kristeva Il rischio del pensare, and she's working on a volume on Kristeva. The title of her paper is From Due Partite to Di Nuovo, Cristina Comencini's Feeble Post-Feminist Footprint.
Okay, apologies to all of you because I wrote my paper in English, but I realized most of the audience speak Italian, so forgive me, but the examples are going to be in Italian. Hopefully it will be understandable for understanding for everyone. The writer and filmmaker Cristina Comencini, whose name is well known to the public for a number of successful works, measures herself with the play Due Partite in 2006, which shows a number of features of interest for our discussion on post-feminism, new feminism, whatever you want to call it today. Several of the issues in the theater in the play are later extended in the manifesto of the movement Di Nuovo. And interestingly enough, I must say that I have done an analysis of the text of both the manifesto and the play, and of course I'm leaving out a lot that could be said on both. But I've picked the same time frame that both Crizia and Cosenza just highlighted. So what Cosenza called the years of fermento among women, so from 2006 to 2010, without coordinating this. It's working fine. Due Partite is a two-act play where two generations of women take turns. The setting for Act 1 are the 60s. Four bourgeois ladies meet every week to play cards. They are unhappy about the marriage and disillusioned with life. One had to renounce to her career as a musician to take care of her family. Another one is betrayed by her husband. The other one betrays her husband. The fourth one is about to give birth to a child. But his romantic view of life is interrupted by the tales of unhappiness of her friends. Four words of solitude whose counterpart is represented by the daughters, who play close to them in the first act and will grow into unhappy human beings in the second. The second act, 30 years later, self-realization through work, economic independence, and career are no more a dream. But dissatisfaction, solitude, and questions concerning male and female roles are still there. The weight of maternity is as heavy as before, but it is brought into a different type of discourse, into present days, and artificial insemination, as well as weakness of male characters, we talked about it yesterday, are introduced. In 2010, Cristina Comencini and a number of women, writers, journalists, housewives, started a movement called Di Nuovo, which was established around a strong concern about the role and dignity of women in the age of Berlusconi. In brief, the content of the manifesto Di Nuovo, which is indeed complex and worth being explored better than I will do today, well at the time, explains the composite nature of the movement, states its position in respect to feminism by saying that the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s brought with them some important achievements but did not carry enough political weight. Di Nuovo is worried about all the opportunities denied to women and also about the current female image, which offends the principles of respect and good taste and obscures women's professional, civil, and cultural growth, but especially about the idea of freedom, which once again was highlighted yesterday by several colleagues. I carefully interrogated the critical potential of Due Partite, the text, as I said, to see how it touches on the differences between mothers and daughters, maternity, male and female roles, self-fulfillment, and a series of other essential post-feminist, new feminist ideas which are later channeled into Di Nuovo. Can Due Partite be rightly included in post-feminism or not? Some features are certainly those of post-feminism. Cecilia's obsession with singlehood is, for example, perfectly in line with what Negra affirms in What a Girl Wants in 2009. And I quote, "Single and non-parenting women's lives are empty, deficient, or not yet fully underway. Motherhood is seen as salvation." Both the first and the second acts of the play demonstrate how children are needed to fill a void which is individual and existential, and a quote from Act 1, the first generation. I bambini, però mi chiedo, quando saranno cresciuti, come farò a riempire le giornate? And from the second act, the second generation, Cecilia, who's at artificial insemination, says, io lo sogno di notte il bambino, mi pare di vedere il suo viso e poi vado dal medico a Londra e non è successo niente. In her book Post-Feminisms, Anne Brooks highlights some common traits in post-feminist productions which are mostly concentrated around gender struggle, sexual pleasure, individual choice, humor, and a new focus on the female body. Other important concerns are the interest for a pluralist discourse, which does certainly apply to the normal, and the breaking of binary thinking. In the light of this, I adopted a critical position, which I think is strategic for post-feminism, even though I would be very careful denying the author I'm quoting as a post-feminist. She wouldn't certainly like it. I'm talking about Julia Kristeva, whose theories on revolt and the female genius and the emphasis on the singularity of the individual that transcends gender definitions can be useful to get a better sense of where the Guipati and the Momo stand. From the revolution of poetic language to the female genius, Kristeva stated the importance of maternity, particularly with respect to the development of the subject and the access to language and culture. In the revolution of poetic language, a text that most of us know pretty well, Kristeva theorizes the semiotic as a translinguistic modality of signification connected to maternity and the infancy of language. The semiotic is the maternal space prior to sexual difference. It is a dimension inside which one can meet the other. To this maternal space belongs the fusion also with the mother as a paradise was, and this idea is found in the play in several places. Sofia, for example, states, mia madre odora di acqua di colonia al mughetto, mi viene sempre da piangere tra le sue braccia. Quando morirà mia madre, forse allora avrò il coraggio di lasciarlo, her husband, ma è longeva come tutte le donne. This example beautifully displays the consequences of the immeasurable love between mothers and daughters, which often prevents them from developing independently of their mothers. Starting from Melanie Klein's theories, Kristeva states the separation from one's mother, a symbolic matricide is necessary to the subject, for the subject to be free. But here it does not really seem to take place, even when advocated, end quote. Sofia talking about her mother. Perché mi dava quel peso? Che cosa avevo fatto per meritarlo? E ora io non riesco a staccarmi dal suo braccio, che cretina. Io mi auguro che Rossana mi abbandoni, che mi lasci un ospizio, che sia libera di non vedermi per tutta la vita. Unfortunately, the emphasis in Guipatite is not on the full realization of the female subject, on the development of the other in oneself after separating from the mother. On the contrary, the maternal bond is seen as almost always present, and most of the times is seen in a negative light. So much of it is brought to the extreme of suicide. And unfortunately, suicide is in the play, transversal to generations and passing from mother to daughter, from the first to the second act. And a quote from the second act. Ma la nonna non si era suicidata anche lei? Sì, più o meno alla stessa età. Ma da una madre si può ereditare pure il suicidio? The theme of suicide is introduced in the first act by a quote from Sylvia Plath's Lady Lazarus, made by Sofia when observing, while looking at their children. Giocano tranquille, sembrano noi da piccole, prima che il letto, il coltello, l'ago di spilla e il balsamo ci inchiodassero questa parentesi. Certainly, this quotation from Sylvia Plath makes us perceive the whole sense of loneliness, paralysis, and silence surrounding women, and of course, we also think of Sylvia Plath's suicide and of the difficulty to speak to the symbolic order that she encountered, or we probably still encounter nowadays. A lighter but also positive reference to male creative force, to female creative force, lies in the text of Guipatite in the elderly Claudia's amusing attempt at constructing a virtual reality on the internet, and I found this example as one of the most interesting of the play. Cecilia is speaking about her mother. Lei non ha mai tempo, sta tutto il giorno a chattare sul suo computer. Dovete vedere com'è veloce, ha un sacco di amici, si inventa una vita diversa con ognuno, racconta un sacco di balle, che a 20 anni lavora in banca, dà consigli sugli investimenti. A un altro ha detto che è un travestito che cambia uomo ogni sera, ma che il suo amore vero è un piccolo caimano che aveva nella vasca davanti. Significantly enough, in the first act of the play, Claudia represents the traditional mother, the mother par excellence, who lives for her children. In the second act, with her virtual life, she can finally have, and I quote, tutte le vite più buone. This very interesting room of one's own could have been further explored by Comici. I believe that it represents a very good attempt in the direction of the construction of the self as one prefers. It is not so different from the creative process of writing. This is in fact writing oneself. It's certainly a good example of free choice, of the symbolic maturity in the sense of the capacity to give birth to oneself. It becomes difficult to formulate judgments. Is this a form of reinvention of the self, or should we ask if it is instead a mask of the self? And what is missing from this type of representation? And this opens up a whole big parenthesis on the use of also these types and means of construction of the self. The flourishing of one's own singularity, to go back to Kristeva, which I never read about it, calls the female, what Kristeva calls the female genius, applies to various fields, including maternity, which does not exclude the possibility of self-realization, and fortunately does not necessarily lead to suicide, but can follow many different paths. Of course, an emphasis on this type of symbolic maternal experience opens up to a series of positive realizations, which could also respond to what is advocated by the manifesto of Dumont, and I quote, essere donna non è una disgrazia né della natura né della storia, ma una delle manifestazioni della differenza interna all'umanità che va lasciata libera di esprimere tutto il suo genio. A further trait of interest for us to discuss is then the overcoming of binary thinking, which can be realized in various ways, particularly by going beyond the strict separation of male and female categories by stating the centrality of a polyphonic being. In the play, there is a wonderful exemplification of this breaking of binary categories conveyed by the beautiful poem by Rainer Maria Rilke that was quoted by Paolo yesterday, which is as superb, of course, it's Rilke, as predictable, as it has, of course, been widely used by critics and feminists. The poem functioned very well as a trait d'union between mothers and daughters. There's various attempts at reading the poem throughout the play, but it is employed to construct a climax, and of course, it's only at the end that we can finally read it. It's actually the very end of the play itself. And I quote, questo progresso, I quote from Comencini, quoting, questo progresso trasformerà l'esperienza dell'amore che ora è piena d'errore, la muterà dal fondo, la riplasmerà in una relazione da essere umano a essere umano, non più da maschio a femmina. Overall, Due Partite does not seem to be very successful in going beyond all these categories. It does instead propose on the one side a reconciliation of the sexes via a simplified idea of brotherhood with men. On the other, it shows an inversion of roles where women are given masculine traits, but even these are not so many in the play. And I quote, una volta Saverio è venuto a trovarmi all'istituto, parlavo con i colleghi, ci stavamo lasciando le consegna. Mi stavo osservando da dietro il vetro, gli sono andata incontro. Mi ha detto, mi ha fatto impressione come parlavi, sembravi in me. And one more. Anche a me quando suono bene, per farmi un complimento mi dicono che ho proprio il tocco di un uomo. And finally, men are sometimes attributed less virile traits. And I quote, quando ci metti from the second act, quando ci mettiamo a letto si avvicina piano piano, mi chiede educato se non sono troppo stanca per fare l'amore. Ma che si fa così? Ma un po' di energia ci vuole, un po' di virilità è necessario. In due partite, critique is mostly conducted through subtle humor and overemphasizing the features we spoke about. The potential of the text is visible, but one cannot avoid asking what strategies of critical resistance can help insert in the play in the political dimension searched by Comincini, who in an interview to the newspaper Il Corriere della Sera, April 9, 2006, states: in un periodo storico in cui dobbiamo confrontarci col modello dell'Islam da una parte e le veline dall'altra, questo testo è politico e temo che farà arrabbiare qualcuno. Political in what sense? In senso non senso revolt, Christie affirms that, and I quote, the very notion of culture as revolt and of art as revolt is impaired. Submerged as we are in the culture of entertainment, the culture of performance, and the culture of the show. Her idea of revolt comprises the concept of semantic disorder, among others. Christopher believes that thinking as a form of inquiry and self-questioning should apply not just as a form of protest against the socio-political order, but as a means to reassure renewal. Another keywords to consider. As it can take the shape of artistic creation, maternity or love, revolt seems to suggest a lifestyle. Revolting against identity, sexuality, meaning is political force. These ideas can find appropriate application to what's searched by Comincini and what conceived by the woman. Vogliamo passare dalla rivendicazione dei diritti per le donne alla prova dell'esercizio della responsabilità politica. Siamo al dopo femminismo. È per questo che crediamo sia necessario un pensiero, una riflessione che riguardi i due sessi, gli uomini e le donne. In this respect, language seems to me a extremely important part of the revolt, where the textual and the political are necessarily blended. Kristeva constructs a discourse on the potential force of marginal and repressed aspects of language. And where can we find them, I ask myself, and I'm asking you now. Where can we find these elements in a play like Due Partite? So my conclusions, but again, it's just like one chapter of a very long discourse, and I want for, also the sake of honesty to say that the discourse of Vimov was continued after analysis, and discontinued now. Again, there's much more to what I've just said to be added. In the play, there seems to be a rather feeble irony on the very complex issues of maternity and the generational fighting of the daughter, the realization of the individual and male and female roles. The possibility of reinvention of female self is almost exclusively relegated to an elitist intellectual reference to very well-known and appreciated authors like Rainer Maria Rilke and Sylvia Plath, but some more personal, I think, should be put in there. All the relationships presented in the play are centered on heterosexual bonds. None of them seem to escape the necessity of marriage, of maternity, mostly discussed in their essential social biological functions, not as mental and psychic space for renewal and creativity, not to mention that there's no male characters in the play, the men are all just told by the women. A language of the self and the body, a positive and a strong one, that can work as a counter-proposal against the Medina model, is hopefully on its way. In my opinion, what is needed is a discourse that speaks to the female subject and creates affection, another term used widely yesterday, and sympathy in the sense of affinity and solidarity among women. This could also be as effective as the dominant image of the body proposed in the Berlusconi era. A discourse that speaks of the freedom of the subject as proposed by Vimov forces you in line with what they're looking for. The risk to take is that of transcending the second sex, and the Freudian view of women as dark continent that Due Partite ironically, but also sadly, still reminds us in a quote. Noi siamo delle creature primitive, questa è la ragione, abitiamo ancora nelle caverne. Noi non possiamo diventare moderne, ha ragione Claudia, se diventiamo moderne smettiamo di essere uomini. Ma come si può essere moderne se l'utero si deve aprire di 10-12 centimetri per far passare la testa del bambino? recognizing that maternity is also biology, but allowing a mental, symbolic maternity to shape all of us, independently of biological sex, may be helpful to truly recognize the self and the other from self.